They were hiring for a shelter director. So I kind of played up my experience with my dad. I was like, oh yeah, my dad's trained. I didn't freaking know the guy until like 2 years earlier. So because of that, they gave me my first job running a shelter. So that was like 2008 was my first chance actually working at an animal shelter.
He lied to everybody.
If she never met him, she would still be here.
There was so much deceit.
This place was so run down. It was disgusting.
And I told him that day, I said, you killed the wrong dog.
When you throw the pebble into the pond, you just really don't think about all the ripples that come out from the pebble in the pond. And those ripples go in every direction, and you don't account for them. Well, Mr. Baldwin, you've thrown about 18 bricks in the pond.
Hi, and welcome to the Animal Welfare Junction. This is your host, Dr. G, and our music is written and produced by Mike Sullivan. This is it, final episode, Season 1, State versus Steffen Baldwin, Trial and Sentencing. This is the episode that I would feel we've all been waiting for. We want to see how trial went, how sentencing went, how everybody had something to say, how everybody came together to give their testimony about what Steffen had done against animals, humans, organizations, nonprofits in Ohio and in other places, and how sentencing held him responsible for everything that he did.
My name is Melissa Chase. I'm an assistant prosecuting attorney. I'm actually the chief of the juvenile division in our office. So I do a lot of work in the juvenile system, so children's services cases and delinquency and unruly and juvenile traffic. And I also handle some of the felony prosecution.
My name is Cortland Perry. I am also an assistant Union County prosecutor. My main position is the municipal court for Marysville and the greater area around Marysville, but I also do get into the felony courts as well.
So how did this case come to you?
Jim actually reached out to our office. There was a little bit of a jurisdictional or a venue issue because, as you know, Lisa and Angelo live in Mahoning County. That is where the Campbell Police Force is located. However, Steffen Baldwin lived in Union County, and the majority of the acts that were the result of the indictment happened in Union County. Jim talked to the Mahoning County prosecutors, and they made the decision, or they thought the case would be better to be brought in Union County, where Steffen Baldwin actually was residing and conducting business. So Jim set up a meeting with my boss, and basically they talked about whether or not my boss would accept the case. So that's kind of how it came to us. My boss, David Phillips, told him that he would accept the case, and then we consulted with Jim as he was finishing up the investigation.
I know the prosecution was overwhelmed. You know, you always want evidence, in any case. Well, what happens when you have too much evidence?
For me, I was overwhelmed. I was assigned the case to handle it with by my boss. And when I saw the sheer amount of evidence that Jim had accumulated, it was overwhelming. But I want to tell you, he is such a detailed person. It was astounding to me how hard he worked on this investigation. And please understand, I don't mean anything negative towards law enforcement, but Jim went above and beyond. He conducted a really good investigation. And Dr. G, when you're talking about he went down a rabbit hole, or that's the name of the episode, truly Jim did that. He investigated every single lead in the case, which is astounding. He generated more than 77,000 pages of documents.
I can imagine, like 77,000 pages. Like, I know that, I would not be able to get through that. So I commend you both for being able to go through all of that. And and separate everything out, because then that led to so many different charges.
Jim did a favor for us that when he wrote his reports, he put down, or he listed what he thought the appropriate criminal charges would be, as to try and assist us. So the nice thing was, when we went through all of his police reports and when we looked at the evidence, we at least had some of the criminal charges in the back of our mind. I was the one who wrote the indictment. So we went through Jim's reports, looked at what he said he thought he saw in the evidence, and we made some changes.
There's a whole bunch of other charges I charged him with the Union County Prosecutor's Office didn't go with. They wanted to try to limit it. 42 they thought was a lot originally. But there were more, because I had a whole entire report written about not only his drug use, but his drug selling, as he is an admitted drug dealer as well.
We disagreed about some things. We had discussions about why we didn't think some of these charges were appropriate, and why we decided, that he had gone too far down the rabbit hole, if you understand what I mean, that we don't need to charge this offense. What we have is enough. So it was a long and kind of a tedious process to go through that, to determine what the actual charges were going to be to present to grand jury.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand the fact that just because something may be chargeable, you may not want to do it, for either because you can't prove it, or because it may sound like you're just trying to stack stuff up.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
I think throughout the entire process, I know one of defense counsel's biggest arguments, even though we did, or at least Missy was able to pare down the amount of charges, they still felt that we were just stacking charges on top of them.
They are literally throwing everything but the kitchen sink, hoping something sticks, or hoping that they throw so much at me that I take a deal. Again, that way they can get their win. They can get that, hey, we prosecuted him. He didn't leave Ohio scot-free. We got him, kind of thing.
So it's one of those things that you just got to kind of make a judgment call on.
I don't know that all of our listeners understand what an indictment is and what that means as far as getting things started.
For us, an indictment is basically a complaint. It lists the criminal charges. So in order to present a case to grand jury, we prepare the legal charges that we believe are appropriate, and we actually make a presentation to the grand jury. So there are witnesses, usually it's the law enforcement officer, that testify about these charges. We don't go into the great detail that you do in a trial, because quite frankly, if we did that in Mr. Baldwin's case, we would have been 3 weeks in grand jury as well. But the detective or the law enforcement officer takes you through the charges, explains what the evidence is, but it's more in a summary type proceeding. And then the grand jurors, at the completion of the case, we step outside the courtroom and leave the grand jury in there to deliberate. And the grand jury is trying to determine whether there is probable cause that these criminal offenses that are listed in this criminal complaint called an indictment, whether those actually happened or not.
What were the things that were important to let the grand jury know?
As I said, law enforcement is usually the primary witness, and that was this case as well. So the onus was on Jim to kind of lay out the facts about this case. The reason we brought in other witnesses like you, Dr. Gonzalez, it was important for the grand jurors to understand that there were truly real human victims in addition to the animals in this case. And so that was why it was important for them to see you, to talk about the impact that this had on you, to talk about your experience.
So what is that process as far as getting him from California back to Ohio?
And this was kind of a complicated situation. We were concerned because of his proximity to another country, to Mexico. There was some concern initially that he may leave the country. And so that's primarily why the warrant was issued. And doctor, as you know, he left the state of Ohio on, I believe it was February 8th of 2018, and he was not indicted until 2020. So he had been in California for a substantial amount of time before we actually issued the indictment. So we asked for a warrant for him to be arrested. It was a nationwide warrant for him to be picked up. And I think Jim is the one who actually assisted in getting the U.S. Marshals to actually arrest Steffen.
My cell phone has the cell phone of the detective who tricked me into coming here. You can always give that to the lawyer because I'm sure he...
I've already given that to people.
Okay.
Quite frankly, they lied to him and asked him to come down to the local police station for a training session for the law enforcement officers there. And my understanding, when he arrived, he was arrested by the U.S. Marshals at that time.
I was asked as a ruse to provide this fake training at the sheriff's office. I went there thinking I was going there to help law enforcement. I was arrested the moment I walked in. I was cuffed. I was placed in a holding cell.
Hello, this is a free call from
Steffen.
an inmate located within a Los Angeles County Station jail. This telephone call may be monitored or recorded.
Hello?
Hey.
All right, so step one, get a hold of my lawyer in Ohio.
Okay.
Are you good right now?
Yep.
Okay, step two, we got to find a local bail bondsman.
Okay.
So we find a bail bondsman, bail is set at $200,000. So there's a percentage of that we have to come up with, and they can use the title to the house, the title to the motorcycle, the title to the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and the title to the Ford, all as collateral. Well, everything that we own, that we have, like, you know, that's ours, that we have pink slips to. Call them, explain what happened, and they'll start the process to get bonded out so I can deal with this at home. They didn't give me details. He says he thinks it's embezzlement, but he doesn't really know what the charges are, so I don't have any details right now.
Okay.
I just need you to handle those two things and hold the fort down, and then I should be home tonight.
Okay.
You got this?
I think it's great that they appeal to, you know, his sense of greatness that he had about himself. Like, oh, of course, they want me to teach them something, so I'm going to come down and show them. Like, he did not see that coming, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either.
And I also think, I mean, in general, he thought that he moved to California and left Ohio behind, and then everything was just gonna blow off, and you know, it wasn't going to come after him.
It's just fucking nonsense. But I haven't been able to tell my side of the story because my lawyer said that wouldn't do any good. They just mind your business, stay quiet until it ever comes down to this moment. He didn't think it ever would. He actually returned my retainer like 2 years ago. He's like, look, you've been gone for a year and a half. If they were going to charge you, they would have charged you. So he called me. He's like, hey, I'm really surprised by this. I didn't think this was going to happen. My attorney is honestly like, he's scratching his head.
I was ecstatic. I was so happy because just the fact that he was arrested and indicted on animal cruelty charges, I felt would make a big difference in at least keeping him out of the animal rescue community. Because who with a half a brain is going to go ahead and hire a man who was indicted on animal cruelty charges?
Like everybody knows.
What?
Like everybody knows.
What do you mean?
The Remy people were writing about it online. Sharon Logan's writing about it online. So like people have been talking to me and asking me questions, texting me all day long.
What does it say? What's it saying?
That Remy will be proud looking down, and that they took 2 years, but Lisa finally got you, and more to come, or whatever she says. And then there's a lot of talk now about Luke, too.
Westerman, oh.
That you're associated with that.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's actually why you're in there.
Oh, you think so?
Is that? Yes.
We heard from Meg Sell on the Link episode about how Steffen had no concerns for other people's safety.
I honestly have no idea what he was doing, but he was always on the road, always traveling and whatever. So it was a lot of me with these dogs without any previous experience. Looking back at it, I'm like thankful I never got hurt because I like really had no experience. But I think there was like some taken advantage of just like my like love for dogs.
And like everything else, it was a pattern that he would continue with his new girlfriend in California.
So safety for you. When I'm not comfortable with the dog and I'm moving them, I don't know what they're going to do. Of course, the halt is on me. But I'll usually take the bottom of a tray, like the Alcatraz crates have those trays at the bottom, or like the lid from a trash can or something, and just put it in between me and the dog. So I'm luring them with the food. I have my safety tools, but I also have some kind of barrier in between me and the dog. So you can always do that as well.
Okay. I was thinking with Max too, I might just like keep throwing it away from me so he goes to run and get it.
Yeah, keep throwing it away from you. The only other thing is Nala. She's over there too.
Okay.
Now she's a sweetheart, but she's also a pain in the ass to get back in. So you could, again, food and halt work great for her. You show her one and you show her the other and she'll listen to you. But you could always swap her and calm it out.
Maybe I'll do that. That's easier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But yeah, just halt, food, and then have like a lid or a tray or some kind of barrier in between the two of you. Because the worst case scenario is one of them decides to go after you. They're going to go after that barrier, and then you're going to halt them. They're going to leave. Okay. They all know what it is. Nala hates halts. She knows what it is. So that might be the easiest thing, is to do that with both Angus and Nala, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, just grab a barrier, halt, and high value rewards, and they're easy. They're not hard to obviously.
And that's, we can't expect someone that has no experience to deal with a dog who has a potential aggression issue. They don't have the experience. They don't likely have the timing and the understanding of it, not to their fault, but it's so irresponsible, to think that someone else could just step in and do it.
He waived extradition, which allowed us to bring him back without having to get a governor's warrant. So that was something that was good for him to have done.
But I am willing, to fly back. I have to answer to the charges where they were filed, and they're from Ohio, so I'm going to have to go back to Ohio. But they know that I'm willing to do that on my own. The same way Luke hopped on a plane after he got released, went to Ohio. Do what he had to do.
So he comes back voluntarily to Ohio, has a law enforcement escort back to Ohio, and is incarcerated in Tri-County Jail, and then brought before the court for an arraignment, which is the opportunity, a hearing where he gets to enter a plea to the charges. Almost always, it's not guilty to all of the charges, and then talk about whether he wants legal counsel, a public defender, or he's going to hire his own legal counsel, and what his bond is going to be.
And I know that he spent a certain amount of time in jail awaiting what was happening, and then finally he was bonded out, right?
Basically, if I remember correctly, the bond ended up being set at $200,000. And the court allowed 10%, so he was able to post bond almost immediately after the arraignment.
What were the charges and what were the changes?
The original charges on the animal cruelty for the majority of the dogs that we charged that particular offense were charged as misdemeanors initially. And also there was a falsification charge that was a misdemeanor, and impersonating a law enforcement officer that was a misdemeanor. Given the amount of time that it took for Jim's investigation and the amount of time it took to get the case indicted, we were in trouble, at least according to the court, with the amount of, when we're talking about the statute of limitations. And so it was challenged by the defense counsel. It was challenged successfully. We lost on that issue. So those misdemeanors, the cruelty to animals that were misdemeanors of the first degree, and the impersonating a police officer and falsification basically were dismissed from the indictment. Now, Remy had been indicted as a cruelty to animals, a felony of the 5th degree, as had Gucci. After that had happened, it was very disappointing to me, since I was the one who did the indictment. I went back and took a look at the law, and we took a hard look at the idea of needlessly killed, which quite frankly is an interesting issue in this whole case. Cortland and I have spent a lot of time talking about that. But at that point, I brought the case back to grand jury, and for the cruelty to animal charges, recharged them basically as felonies. I believed, doing the research and looking at needlessly killed, I believed that those cases could continue as felonies at that point. So I took a second look at it, and we took it back to grand jury, and the grand jury indicted the animal cruelty charges as felonies. So all of them became felonies of the 5th degree.
So basically, his tactic kind of backfired, right? Because then he made misdemeanors into felonies, which should be a bigger charge. Once he made bail and he was released, he had certain stipulations, certain things that he had to abide to, right?
They basically pre-trial conditions. He had to be drug screened was one of them that I recall. He had to live at a certain place, meaning once he gave the court his address, he was not allowed to leave that location unless he had permission from the court. Obviously not to commit any other violations of federal, state, or local law.
So he had to be drug free. He got into a wreck during that period of time. And then there was also an issue with that he attributed to poppy seeds or something like that.
He got into a one car, I guess, wreck. Apparently he was in I don't know if it was a state park. I think that's what it was, around the Dayton area where he was residing when this case first started. It was a rollover accident, a fairly serious accident. As far as I know, there were no drugs, alcohol, anything that caused this accident. He was never charged with anything, but it was a loss of control on this state park road at night, and he ended up flipping his Jeep multiple times, is my understanding. So a really serious car accident. He was hospitalized, obviously, and then transferred eventually to a nursing home to recover. The poppy seed is, as I said, one of the bond conditions. He tested positive for an illegal substance, and that's what he attributed the positive test to.
So all of this has happened, and then we're getting close to the actual trial, well, to the first trial. We talked to Lisa about everything kind of leading to it, and then she had some medical conditions that prevented her from attending.
That was an interesting situation. Lisa contacted us about her medical procedure that she was going through in November. Our trial date, I believe, if I remember correctly, was December 8th, was when we were scheduled to start the trial. And what she was going through was a very serious procedure. And this had been scheduled for a long period of time, in months prior to the trial date even being set. So she contacted us, and after she had, like a day or so after she'd had her procedure, and was having a very, very, very tough recovery. So we got a short note from her doctor, and we filed a motion for a continuance because this was major surgery that she had gone through. And the doctor had basically said he did not believe that she would be able to testify and to participate in the trial because of this surgery. So we filed a motion for a continuance, and we were very surprised when the court turned that motion down, so denied that motion. We shared that with Lisa, and in fact contacted her doctor and got a second, more extensive letter talking about kind of some of the symptoms and the pain and the things that she was going through with this surgery, and submitted another motion asking for a continuance of the trial, which was also turned down. The court held like a pre-trial hearing. I think it was about a week before the trial was scheduled to start. So we're still, I think it was at the very beginning of December. And we once again renewed our motion for a continuance. The judge once again turned it down. And in fact, at that point, Lisa had hired legal counsel to file in the Court of Appeals, basically asserting her rights under Marcy's law. Because not only was Lisa a witness in the case, and a major witness, one of the things I pointed out in the motion for continuance was the fact that I believe it was the first 9 counts in the indictment, Lisa was the main witness for each one of those counts. So we were unsuccessful in doing that. So I guess in a manner of high drama, we come down to the actual day of the trial. And I am talking to Lisa on the phone right before the trial is starting. And I remember talking to Lisa, and she told me, I want to talk to the judge. I want to address the judge directly. So at this point, Samantha Hobbs, who is an assistant prosecutor in our office, was my co-counsel. So Samantha and I go back and we talk to the judge and we tell him that Lisa wants to talk to him. And he agreed to do that, and he wanted to do it in the jury room. And Lisa did not want to do that. She wanted to address him on the record. And so we go out into the courtroom, and what was so astounding to me is that we had two documentary filmmakers who were filming the trial at that point. So they are set up with their cameras in the jury box. And in a moment, I will never forget that we got Lisa on Zoom. And so all of us could see her in the courtroom, and she could address the judge. And she told him about how much pain she was in, how difficult it had been to recover from this operation. She went into a great deal of detail about the procedures she had gone through, the impact on her, and how much pain she was in. It was incredibly, incredibly personal stuff. And you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom while that was going on. And so eventually, after the judge finished talking with Lisa, he kind of looked over to the counsel table where Sam and I were sitting, and he looked at us and he said, well, I guess she's not available to testify. And I think both of us just kind of sat there and shook our heads. So the reason we got a continuance on that first trial date was because of Lisa and the courage that it took to come to basically appear in that court and tell the judge personal information about her physical condition. I've never seen anything quite like it before. So if you talk about drama, that was about the most dramatic opening to a trial that I've ever seen.
Once the case was continued, then he lost his attorney, right? And he had to, he classified himself as, is it indigent? Yes.
To be clear, he had 4 attorneys at that point. There were 4 attorneys that were working for him. Attorney Michael String asked the court to withdraw. He actually, in essence, retired from the practice of law. And so he had a pre-planned retirement regardless of this case. So when it went beyond December, he had already planned to retire. Now, he had an associate from his office that was working on the case, and then another attorney, Jonathan Tyak, and he had an associate from his office. So there was a total of 4 of them. All of them moved the court to withdraw. So all 4 attorneys withdrew from the case at that point. And that's when Steffen filled out the affidavit of indigency, saying, I don't have enough money to pay for a private attorney.
Once he did that, then he got permission to move to Florida, right? Because he said that that was the only place that he could live with not having any money, with his brother, I believe.
Yes.
And then he is issued an attorney and a court-appointed attorney. Is that right?
He got actually 2 public defenders.
How are public defenders assigned?
We have a relatively small public defender, basically committee or commission. And so there are the public defenders basically sign up for particular courts. So the 2 that he got in this case were fairly experienced felony attorneys. Perry Parsons is a very experienced felony attorney. He also handles municipal court and juvenile court as well. And so did Mr. Pystrup. So he assigned Mr. Pystrup, and he also assigned himself to assist.
So he cannot say that he did not have good legal representation, right?
No, they're both very qualified. Melissa had mentioned earlier that this case is going to go up on appeal. That will be an issue they're going to raise. That's raised in almost every single appeal But Mr. Parsons and Mr. Peistrup, they're both very qualified attorneys. They both have done scores of felony trials in addition to their municipal court practice and juvenile court practices.
I had a first in this trial. I've never actually prosecuted a case where I had to be a witness in the case. Cortland questioned me because one of the tactics that Steffen Baldwin took is that our office was well known to him and that we had a close relationship and that he had a close relationship with me.
The work that I said I was doing, I was actually doing, and Missy knows that because Missy, sorry, is the prosecutor. Missy knows that because she prosecuted my cases. So she,
Yeah.
like when I found out that it was her, and her actual name is Melissa, Katie, but like I know her so well that I just called her Missy. So I don't know if you caught that when I was like, hey, so is it Missy? And Mike was like, well, yeah, it actually is Missy. Could you tell he was a little surprised I knew her by her nickname? I don't think he realized that I have a long-standing relationship with the woman who is going to be now on the opposite side of the table going to the judge and saying, this is what we should do with this man.
So he was the first witness in the case, not testifying about the charges, but testifying about his relationship to the Union County Prosecutor's Office as well as me. And I was the second witness in the trial. So it was a very uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, I doubt there's ever going to be a situation in my career where I'm ever going to get to direct exam my own co-counsel.
I can say that when I was on the stand, I did not feel like I was in front of somebody that was like, I mean, for lack of a better word, dumb, right? Like that was fumbling around and not really understanding. Like he seemed to have a pretty good understanding of the facts, and he had like the defense attorneys do. He tried to say things and try to get me to say things that were not necessarily what I was trying to convey. So I mean, I think that he put up a pretty good effort from my perspective.
And that's a very valid perspective. We don't know what it was like for you on the stand. We can watch, but we don't really understand what your feelings were going through that. So I appreciate knowing that point of view.
So I know some of the tricks of the trade, and I know some of the things that are going to happen, and I know how to answer questions and how to conduct myself. But it's still, this case was a little bit different because even though I was giving some expert type of opinion, then there was also a personal part of it, like the part where I was a victim of what he had done. And it honestly, it did not hit me until sentencing, which we will talk about a little bit later. But the whole time I'm just like, this is like another day in court, no big deal. And then the reality came about that this wasn't just another day in court.
It was a very emotional case, and we had the advantage of having you. It's not good that you were a victim, but we had the advantage of having a witness. You were a fact witness for us, but you also had all of the credentials to be an expert witness. So we got 2 for 1. If you were, we got our fact witness who was an expert as well. So that was very helpful to us.
How many charges was he charged with as we were going in?
As we were going in, there were 39 counts in the indictment that were in play.
Can you go over some of the different charges that he was facing?
He had a bribery charge. There was only one of those, which is a felony of the 3rd degree, and that was involving Litsa, Kargakos, and Remy. We had a number of telecommunications fraud charges involving the dogs. Typically, those were, as you know, he had a pattern. He would take a dog in and basically publicize the rescue of the dog, post photographs of the dogs, solicit donations. He would get incredible comments about what he'd done, adulation, praise for saving the dog. But the problem for him, as you know, became what to do with this dog after the dog had been rescued, because he needed to be on to the next big thing. The telecommunications fraud involved the dog having been deceased, and Steffen posting on Facebook, on Pet Finders, Rescue Me Ohio, that the dog had been adopted, and or telling people who were invested in, what happened to the dog, lying to them about the dog's condition. So he never told people the dogs were deceased. He told them they were, it was a foster fail. They were adopted, or they were living with a foster family. So all of the dogs that he talked about, he said had good outcomes, and the opposite was true. So that's the telecommunications fraud. We had tampering with records. 4 of the counts involved Remy's when he went in after Remy had died, filling out a application for a dog license for Remy, and filling out an application for a dangerous dog license for Remy. After Remy had died in December of 2016, he went in April 2017 in an effort to convince Lisa that Remy was still alive. We had theft of a firearm. This was the gun that was purchased with Act Ohio funds that Steffen took with him to California. We had, obviously, that we talked a little about the cruelty to animals, which ranged from that these animals were needlessly killed, or that these animals were deprived of necessary veterinary care for conditions that they suffered from. We had theft charges. We had theft from ACT Ohio, which was Steffen's nonprofit organization, and from TOPS, which is the Top of Ohio Pet Shelter in Logan County. We had a theft count for what we called the fundraisers when he took money. And Dr. G, you'll be familiar with this, the Art of Act. That was a joint fundraiser with your organizations, Rascal Charities and Rascal Animal Hospital and ACT Ohio, that raised net of over $16,000. And then we had the engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity, which is what we call the RICO. And that was looking at Steffen being in an enterprise with ACT Ohio and basically committing a variety of offenses such as theft, bribery, theft of a firearm. Those are predicate offenses for the RICO, but it was basically saying he had a scheme or a plan to defraud people.
How many witnesses did you say you had?
I believe it was 55, 56 witnesses.
Yep. Somewhere in there.
And how many witnesses were called from the defense side?
Maybe 4.
They did them out of order. Because they called their expert in the middle of our case in chief.
Yes.
The defense brought in an expert witness, behaviorist type person to kind of refute your findings. And one of the issues that I had was that this behaviorist, or this person, I'm not going to call her a behaviorist because she's not. This person was talking about that it was okay to euthanize these dogs just based on what was on the papers.
I would disagree with that in many instances because some of these dogs really did not have issues. And firsthand knowledge of Remy was a very adoptable dog at that stage.
So Winston was taken by Sarah Winfield down to Rascal Animal Hospital for a veterinary checkup. Would you agree with that procedure, having him medically assessed?
Yes.
All right. That's what she thought she was taking Winston down for, correct?
Correct.
And instead, Winston was there at Steffen Baldwin's request to be euthanized, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Baldwin asked Dr. Gonzalez to lie to Sarah Winfield and not tell her the real reason that Winston was there.
Correct.
That's troubling behavior. Would you agree?
Not necessarily.
I think without giving these dogs due diligence to know if there was a medical component or to give them the opportunity to work with them on behavior modification, I think it was irresponsible to have taken that. And so if you're looking at it just on paper, I think there are enough mistakes made that many of these dogs could have actually had the potential to be worked with.
As an expert witness, I've testified, and I usually have to say if there's a conflict of interest, you've testified and you made it clear that you had worked with Remy, so you knew about Remy and that you did not know about the other animals. And this other expert witness already had an idea of what she was going to find before she even got the case, because she knew about the case back when it started, back when Litsa started looking into what happened to Remy, and she thought already that Litsa was crazy and that, this was all just a witch hunt to get back at Stefan.
You've known Mr. Baldwin, we talked about this before, for several years, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you know about this case when it first was indicted?
Yes. I mean, it was all over the internet, so yes.
Okay. And if you recall, did you make any comments about this case?
Oh, I'm sure, yes, but I didn't believe that he would deliberately do anything to harm any dog.
And did you make comments about this case on social media?
Absolutely.
And did you feel like you needed to disclose the fact that you actually commented on social media about this case to the court?
I did disclose that when I was contacted by the attorney.
Is that in your report?
No, I didn't know it needed to be in my report.
You're Debbie McMullen, correct, on this Facebook site?
Correct.
Did you make a comment saying something along the lines of, and you know this for a fact, right? And I'm not talking about believing Lisa's false accusations. Did you make a comment like that?
I'm sure I did. I'm sure he did, but it's been years. I'm not going to remember every single comment I made in the past. Again, I knew about it. I was not part of the keyboard warriors, and I made my own determination based on what I knew. And then years went by, and then I gathered this material. I was given this task to do, and it can simply confirm what I believed at the time.
All right, so you had formed an opinion about this case before you ever looked at the materials, correct?
Correct.
All right, so a comment that you made, well, unless you actually had a conversation with the man in question about what happened, I don't think you can say that any article is accurate when it's painting him as exactly what the woman who spent 3 years trying to manufacture evidence against him is claiming. Local doesn't mean factual. It means that there are crazy people who maintain grudges for a long time. Did you say that?
I'm sure I did. Again, this is many years ago.
And then to Jeff, no, I'm not making up anything. Anyone can get charged with anything. It took 3 years to manufacture so-called evidence. If there really was an issue, he would have been charged within a reasonable time frame. This is what happens when an insane person has a revenge agenda. I'm not the crazy one. You are. Sound like something you would have said?
Absolutely. Keyboard warriors will go out there trying to ruin your business if you have anything to do with the situation. And that could mean supporting the person who's the victim. I think it's ridiculous that is permitted to happen. People should base these things on actual facts, all sides of the equation, not just their version of such.
Would it be fair to say that you were defending Mr. Baldwin and you had no facts in the case yet, back in 2020?
Yes, I have facts on my knowledge of him.
Okay, and you were fairly vigorous in your defense of Mr. Baldwin. Would that also be fair to say?
That would be fair to say.
All right, and you formed an opinion about this case back in 2020. You just told us that.
Yes.
So I think, as an expert witness, it is a hard thing to look at something. And I think you have to remember what the scope of your responsibility is. So, the directive for me was, were these dogs given the opportunity to change behavior? Was there any training done? And having any, you have to be able to kind of eliminate any biases of the individual. And although I had only met Steffen once and it was just a brief hello, and but obviously, I didn't have the relationship, friendship that the other person had with him. But I think it doesn't mean you couldn't be an expert witness, but you have to be able to set that aside and look at simply the facts that are in front of you. And I don't think you can dispute based on what was put forth, that these dogs were not provided what they should have had. And in fact, were provided things that were to the detriment of these dogs. And so I think as an expert witness, it is something where you have to be able to just focus on the scope of what you are being asked to do and not look at any other aspect of it or the individual, because that is not relevant to what you are looking at.
Once you were done with all the witnesses, how did you feel about how the trial went?
I'm trying to think back to what that feeling was like. Relief was one of the first things that we felt, getting through it successfully. And why we didn't, at least for me, why we didn't have an immediate reaction is because we did our closing arguments, as you're aware of, in writing. So our journey, our task wasn't finished at that point. So while it was a relief to have the testimony behind us, we still had that hurdle to get over in writing the closing argument. That's what drew this whole thing, the case, out so long, is trying to get the closing arguments and things like that in. And I will say, the people that talked to Cortland and I agree with what he had to say about it. It was a logistical nightmare to try and figure out who was going to testify for us on what day. And it constantly changed. But when we reached out to people to talk to them, I can't remember that anybody turned down talking to us. Mm-hmm. There were certainly people that were not enthusiastic about being involved in this whole process, would have preferred not to have been involved, but they all cared about what we were doing. They either cared about the animals and were going to testify because they wanted to testify and help us that way, or they were victim of thefts and things like that, and they felt strongly about holding him accountable for that. So I can't say enough nice things about the people that worked with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, as you mentioned, I think a lot of people were happy to finally see him being, put on there to answer for all the crimes that he had committed, because he hurt a lot of people, he hurt a lot of animals, and even people that were not directly involved were harmed in some way, like emotionally or financially.
One of the witnesses I will never forget, it was the widower of, we were going to actually use Constance Swackhammer as a witness for the dog Sammy. And Constance unfortunately passed away. Everything I've learned about her, I think she was an outstanding human being. And I will never forget the time that I spent on the phone talking to her. But she unfortunately passed away. And we wanted to it was a telecommunications fraud charge involving Sammy. We wanted to be able to put on evidence about that. So I reached out to Constance's husband, Larry, and I truly think, someone was looking out for us, because Larry still had Constance's phone, and the Constance's text messages with Steffen Baldwin from 2016 were still on that phone. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't find a 2016 text on my phone. So we met with Larry, who was grieving so very greatly for his wife. And he told me that this would be what Constance would want him to do. And so he appeared at the trial. He brought her cell phone with him, and we were able to lay the foundation for the text that Steffen Baldwin sent to her about Sammy after Sammy had been euthanized, telling Constance that Sammy was in a foster home. First, that he was in a smaller play group, and then he went to a foster home. So we were able to get those text messages in by the grace of God, I like to say. But I will never forget how emotional that testimony was, with Larry on the stand talking about his wife, who had just passed away.
One of the people that I think that was on your list of witnesses was Jane Cooper, who was at Tops, and she was very important to me personally, because I knew her and she was very supportive of everything that we did, and she was actually a board member for Rascal Charities. Eventually she was helping us go to Logan County and offer spay neuter services and that kind of stuff. And I know that she really wanted to be there and she really wanted to say, what she needed to say. And unfortunately, cancer took her away from us.
I certainly learned about her from her granddaughter, Erica. I talked to Erica because Erica, as you know, worked at Tops. And she was we didn't end up using Erica, but she was very helpful, talked to me about her grandmother, and had definite opinions about Steffen Baldwin.
So you mentioned that you had written closing arguments, and that's something that actually I had never heard about until this case.
It was something that we had to have happen, and I'm saying that you already have heard there were 39 charges, and to try and summarize 3 weeks of testimony in the span of a couple of hours, I didn't feel like we could do justice to that. And we got no pushback from the defense counsel. They, while we have to argue about all the elements in the 39 charges, they've got to defend all of that. So we both realized that it was an overwhelming task, and Judge Hogan was very good about it. So we laid out basically a briefing schedule, and we presented the briefs in the closing arguments as we would in a trial, which means the state goes first. So I filed, and I say Cortland and I wrote it. We filed the closing argument first. The defense counsel had the benefit of then reading our closing argument and responding to it. And then we got to do, in essence, a rebuttal closing argument. And obviously that doesn't work when you have a jury. You have to present it live when you have a jury.
So you have done your closing arguments, and then there's a hitch because they come back with something about Detective Conroy. So what was that about?
They had, I'm trying to think how it unfolded. I believe it was someone notified defense counsel that Jim had some disciplinary history in his background that had not been provided to defense counsel.
Somebody had sent the defense a news article from, I don't know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and just sent it to defense counsel. And defense counsel then started wondering what was going on.
I thought that it was something more recent, more kind of like relevant. So yeah. And were they trying to go after his credibility, or what was their end game?
Yeah, I think they were trying to attack his credibility, saying, you see, there was a disciplinary incident. He's not a good officer, so we thought honestly that they would attack Jim, and try and prove that he's biased against Steffen Baldwin, that, he didn't like Steffen Baldwin, so he wasn't fair in his investigation. But that was not something, I was surprised. I don't know how Cortland felt, but that was not really something that they, that they went after or they brought up when he was on the stand. They wanted to talk about something that happened to Jim 25 years ago in 1999.
And talking to Jim, it wasn't what they were talking about, and he really, he had won that case and had moved on, and there was nothing negative on his record.
Yeah, I don't even know that they had much of his record left. It was the Youngstown Police Department, and basically while they had disciplined Jim, he ended up getting his job back. So for us, it was an incredibly minor incident. But the only good thing is Jim got to go on the stand and to explain his point of view.
Yeah, it was essentially a unique situation because we had, at that point, had wrapped the case up. We had filed our closing arguments, but both sides had filed their closing arguments at that point, and the judge was essentially about to start reading everything and making his decision when defense counsel filed this. So it created an interesting situation where everything was done, and then we actually went back into court, opened the case back up, and allowed defense counsel the opportunity to ask the detective about these things. So essentially, that is not how things are normally done.
So then once that was done, then the judge has the time to read all of this information And I mean, I don't envy him because there was just so much stuff from both sides and so much that he needed to look at. But finally, he calls everybody back and says that he's ready to do the sentencing. And at that point, Stefan was in Florida. So how does that work as far as getting him back?
He came back on his own. And we didn't have to do anything at that point. Obviously, if he hadn't shown up, that's when we would have stepped in and issued warrants and those types of things. But he came back in accordance with his bond conditions. That was one of which is he shows up for hearings.
Part of the sentencing was the victim impact statements. And that's really important as far as the judge hearing how people were harmed by his actions.
They can be immensely impactful on the judicial officer that's hearing this. This is not an appeal for sentiment. The judges are, they're not being ruled by sympathy, and the sentencing is not for the jury to be involved in. Obviously, we didn't have a jury, but the jury's not involved in sentencing for the most part. So I think what Judge Hogan heard that day from the victims was incredibly impactful for him.
Yeah. I mean, the victim impact statement is truly the chance for us to inject some humanity into every case. So many cases don't go to trial, they're pleas, but even the cases that do go to trial, we're limited on what we can talk about and what the victims can talk about. We talk about the facts of the case, but they don't get to get up there and really explain how has it impacted them. So really the victim impact statements is a chance for the judge to kind of hear how has this affected somebody? I've heard what happened. Now, what's the outcome of that? And that's really a chance for the judges and even just everyone in the courtroom to kind of get a better understanding of what's going on.
I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to say. And I know that like your office kept saying like, hey, if you can have it by this date. And then I didn't have it by that date. And then there was another date and there was another date. And I felt bad because it's like, it felt like procrastinating, but it wasn't. It was like every day I kept thinking about something that I wanted to say, make sure that I said, or something that I wanted to say differently. And I literally did not finish my statement until that day. I finished writing everything that I needed to say, and I got in my car and I got there. And, with, I don't know, a half hour, an hour to spare. Because I've written lots of reports, like criminal reports and forensic reports, and everything is very factual. Everything is very objective. And then here is something that I needed to talk about how I was affected. And even as I was writing it, like I felt really good about what I was writing. I'm writing and I was like, yep, this is what I want to say. And this sounds good. And I think that this really demonstrates how I feel. And then when I stood up there and things got real, I honestly for a second didn't think that I was going to be able to read it. I thought that I was going to have somebody else read it for me. And I'm not an emotional person. And it was like it was surreal what I was feeling and being able to get through it.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Michelle Gonzalez, and I'm a veterinarian with an organization commonly referred to as Rascal. I have known of Steffen Baldwin for about over 10 years, and I say of because back then I didn't really know who he was. It took a few years to realize who he really was, and by then so much harm had been done. I met Steffen when we were both doing a presentation on animal cruelty, and I was really excited to meet someone that I could partner with to help animals in the community at a larger scale than what I was doing. But where I saw partnership, he saw an opportunity, a mark, someone he could benefit from. I hate referring to myself as a victim because it feels weak, vulnerable, and hopeless. But while I think of myself as a strong person, I have to admit to myself and everyone that I was conned by Steffen. I believe what he said. I thought he wanted to help, And in my mind, I had found someone to complement what I could do and truly believe we were going to make a huge impact. But soon after I started working with him, he started to show the person he was. At first, I thought he was just scattered and irresponsible. But over time, I realized all he was looking for was notoriety and money. He fundraised for both our organizations, yet kept the funds for himself. He even fundraised for our cases without me knowing, with funds going directly to him. He deceived donors by letting them believe that costs were higher than they were. Meanwhile, I was given my time, my staff, supplies, assistance, and knowledge at little to no cost because I believed in what we were doing. Needless to say, my business and my nonprofit suffered financially as there was no return for what we had done, as he had placed all fundraising efforts to his own organization. Beyond the financial impact, there is something bigger for which I can never forgive him. The damage he did to the animals, their caretakers, the rescue community, and the public. He deceived people by letting them believe that he was rehabilitating and finding homes for at-risk dogs. He flaunted his ability to save any dog, and while he was talking about what he could allegedly do, he was killing the dogs just to open space for others. He used to share this quote saying, "Only a punk would hurt a dog." He is that punk. This degree of deception is that of someone who has no empathy, no ability to care for the feelings of others, someone willing to do or say anything for their own benefit, including killing dogs. I know this is my victim impact statement, but while not recognized as such, I want to speak for the true victims of Steffen's actions, the animals. Regardless of their issues or behaviors, they deserve better. They trusted him, and he betrayed them in the cruelest of ways. He was supposed to save them all, but instead he harmed them and caused them suffering. I do not want to take away from the animals, from their memory, and from their sacrifice. This is a victim impact statement, and I want to recognize them for it. In closing, I want to thank everyone who stepped up to hold Steffen accountable. And as you, Your Honor, sentence him for his actions, I want you to consider his lack of remorse and acknowledgement for what he has done, the impact he has had on so many emotionally and financially. The fact that if allowed, I believe he will use animals again for his benefit, and the recent Supreme Court decision in State v. Kyles acknowledging that all animals matter. Nothing will bring the animals back, but we can start healing by knowing that he has been held accountable for his actions and that he will never be allowed to use animals or people for his own benefit. Thank you, Your Honor.
Being in that position, having to speak and get very personal and be very vulnerable, that's not something that I'm used to. So it was definitely hard to get through.
Well, we appreciate the efforts you put into it. As I said, I know we've said it's impactful, but it also is important for the court to see how much it mattered to so many people.
Mm-hmm.
So then, we get through our victim impact statements, and then he has an opportunity to speak. And in my opinion, it was, what I would expect, just very self-centered. When you're giving your statement to the court, you need to demonstrate that you feel remorseful and you feel sorry for the damage that you have caused to the victims. And as he was talking, I personally did not feel like he cared about the harm that he had caused me or anyone else.
I think so. I don't think he turned around and looked at anybody or addressed any of those remarks to the victims who were sitting behind him and off to his left. So it would not have been difficult for him to turn and face, the victims that were in the gallery. He didn't do that. And I'm trying to think, somebody had told me that I think he referred to the victims as those people when he was talking to the court.
That I wasn't sharing what happened with the people behind me. These agreed upon facts have already been heard said before, and both here and to the people behind me. It's important to me, again, only from a context standpoint, that the people behind me understand.
Those aren't tones or words of remorse, using phrases like that.
I mean, I'll never forget when he was wrapping up what he was saying, and he said, "Well, I just want to declare here that I'm officially retiring from the animal community."
I believe that my permanent retirement from the field of animal rescue and the advocacy work that goes with it might be more than just an apology.
I know that upset me personally because we had just gone through. I mean, I wasn't even a victim in this case, and that upset me because it just seemed so. Apart from the fact that it just seemed so false, and clearly he said it just to try to garner sympathy, it missed the mark entirely too as to what it was supposed to be. And especially after the judge had listened to 3 weeks of testimony from the state proving that he is a liar over and over and over again. To hear him say that was just, it kind of honestly astounded me.
I got the biggest goosebumps when the judge started talking and made the comment about it wasn't a pebble into water. He threw bricks, 18 bricks into the water. And I think that was the first time that I started to realize this is going to happen.
Misty and I, prior to that hearing, had been talking about it and going over and over again on was he going to get prison time, how much prison time, and even up until that point, at least I wasn't certain one way or the other. I had my feelings. I thought he was going to get prison time, but you never know. Sometimes things happen. And when he said that, I kind of looked at Missy and I was like, that's a pretty good way to start this.
A lot of words have been spoken. I've thought about what I wanted to say, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm not going to say very much at all. I'll simply say this. I have sentenced any number of people in the 20-plus years that I have been a judge. And there are often times when I listen to the victims and I see the defendant listening and all of it is talked about. I look at the defendant and I say, when you throw the pebble into the pond, you just really don't think about all the ripples that come out from the pebble in the pond. And those ripples go in every direction, and you don't account for them. Well, Mr. Baldwin, you've thrown about 18 bricks in the pond. So I have to think about the purposes and principles of sentencing. I need to protect the public from future crime, and not just by you. I mean, if I had a crystal ball and could see that you'd walk out and never do anything wrong again, it wouldn't change the fact that I'm supposed to figure out what all of this, what this effect will have upon other people. In a mighty way, you created all of this with all of this social media, all of your presence out there, all over, in the state of Ohio, in this nation, around the world. There are people that know of you. They know what these allegations are. If they have even a rudimentary understanding of what went on here, they got to realize that if they manipulate, they can develop a gravy train. And I think that I have to be mindful that there should be a consequence that would make them stop and say, boy, that ain't worth it. Just not worth it. So I've considered all the purposes and principles of sentencing. I then am told I need to look at what makes things more serious. And Mr. Baldwin, I don't know that I have ever had a case in all these years where so many factors of more serious are checked off. There's only 1, 2, 3 out of 9 that aren't a factor here. The victim of the offense suffered psychological or economic harm. I don't think I need to say another word about that. The offender held a public office or position of trust in the community, and the offense related to that office or position. You were the humane agent here. You represented yourself to be that carried certain gravitas, and it allowed you to do what you did. Number 4, the offender's occupation or profession obliged the offender to prevent the offense or to bring others committing the offense to justice. I don't know that I need to say anything more on that. that your position was used to facilitate the offense. Your relationship with the victims facilitated the offense. All of those factors are present here. Your counsel argued that there's substantial grounds to mitigate your conduct. There are grounds to mitigate your conduct. I don't find them to be substantial, and I've taken those into consideration. Then I move on to likely to commit future crimes or not likely to commit. You really don't have a prior record. I mean, there's stuff there, but it's nothing that amounts to what I would consider determinative in this issue. The one that I have marked, and I put a question mark, it says the offender shows no genuine remorse for the offense. And I have to tell you, you have verbalized remorse. I don't have a clue whether you're telling me the truth or not. If somebody asks me later on, Hogan, what did you think of that? I go, I don't know. I mean, I saw all this behavior proven during the trial, and then I hear this from you. I don't know. I can't tell. So I can't check the shows no genuine remorse, but I can't check the one that says you are remorseful because I don't know. Okay, I'm probably repeating myself, but just to be safe, I've considered the record, the oral statements, the pre-sentence investigation, the victim impact statements, the need for deterrence, incapacitation, rehabilitation, principles and purposes of sentencing, and I've balanced the seriousness and the recidivism factors as we just discussed. Count one. It is a felony of the third degree. It is a sentence of the court that you spend 30 months with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. Count two is a telecommunications fraud, felony 4, has to do with REMI. It is the sentence of the court that you spend 6 months ODRC. Count 3 is a tampering with records. Sentence on count 3 is 12 months ODRC. Counts 5 and 6 are both tampering with records. They merge. It is 12 months ODRC. Count 8 is cruelty to animals that involves REMI, felony 5, sentence of 6 months ODRC. Count 9 is a telecommunications fraud, felony 5, REMI, 6 months ODRC. Count 10 is telecommunications fraud, felony 5, involving Zach, 6 months ODRC. Count 11, telecommunications fraud, felony 5, Gucci, 6 months ODRC. Count 12 is a cruelty to companion animals, felony 5, involving Gucci, 6 months ODRC. Count 13 is the grand theft of the firearm. It's a felony of the third degree. Sentence of the court, 9 months ODRC. Count 17, telecommunications fraud, felony 5, 6 months ODRC. Count 21, telecommunications fraud having to do with Shadow, 6 months ODRC. Count 22, telecommunications fraud, felony 5, having to do with Titan, 6 months ODRC. Count 26, telecommunications fraud, felony 5, Beretta, 6 months ODRC. Count 28, telecommunications fraud, felony 5, having to do with Misty, 6 months ODRC. Count 37 is telecommunications fraud, felony 5, having to do with Lulu, 6 months ODRC. Count 38, telecommunications fraud, felony 5, having to do with Zyla, 6 months ODRC. Count 39 is a grand theft, felony of the fourth degree, 6 months ODRC. The sentence on count 40 is 9 months ODRC. Count 41 is grand theft, felony 4, 6 months ODRC. Count 42 is engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. It is a felony of the first degree. It's a sentence of the court that you spend 4 years with ODRC. Counts 45 through 53 are all cruelty to companion animals, felonies of the fifth degree. Count 45 involves Titan, 6 months. 46 involves Beretta, 6 months. 47 involves Misty, 6 months. 48 involves Misty again, 6 months. Count 49 involves Roxy, 6 months. Count 50 involves Romeo, 6 months. Count 51 involves Cheyenne, 6 months. 52, again Cheyenne, 6 months. Finally, 53, Pee-wee, 6 months. The sentences for all those counts that were previously announced amount to 186 months. That is 15 and a half years in prison. As far as the consecutive sentences are concerned, the court finds that the shortest prison term would demean the seriousness of the offense and would not protect the public. The court further finds that consecutive sentences are necessary to protect the public from future crime and to punish the defendant, and that consecutive sentences are not disproportionate to the seriousness of the defendant's conduct and to the danger the defendant poses to the public.
I think it was what we hoped for. It followed, I guess, time-wise, that was what our recommendation was. When Cortland and I talked about it, we had some really specific thoughts. Primarily, we wanted him to have a consequence for each one of the animals that he was found guilty of, the offenses relating to them. We wanted every animal to be represented.
Yeah, he met our recommendations. Just the timeline was a little different, but the ultimate time was what we had asked for.
He's at Richland Correctional Institution.
Richland County.
In Mansfield. Yeah, Mansfield.
Now, I like to learn something new almost every day, and I'm about to learn something new. The state suggested that I prohibit this man from being involved with, I think, pets, and I'm not familiar with that statute. Do you have the statute handy?
Yes.
Could I see it, please?
Sure. Your Honor, it is under 959.99, and it's subsection B6A.
Okay, the pertinent part of the statute says that if the defendant has been convicted of one of the offenses that I found him guilty of, the court may prohibit or place limitation on the person's ability to own or care for any companion animals for a specified or indefinite period of time. I will put an order in this judgment entry that the defendant is forever barred from owning any kind of a companion animal.
Many of these prisons have a dog or animal rehabilitation program, and the judge did not want him to be able to work with animals even while he was in prison.
One of the good things that came about from this case, in my opinion, is the precedent that it sets as far as the importance of companion animals in the state of Ohio, and how the community wants people prosecuted for it, and how the court saw the seriousness of this.
I think it's easy for people to separate kind of the human aspect from animal cases, and they view it as, well, it's just a dog or it's just a cat. Clearly the court in this case did not view it like that, and I think that this sets a strong precedent for that going forward, for other courts to point to this and say, here's a perfect example of why this isn't just a dog, why this isn't just a cat.
We got, from the day I spoke up about Steffen, it started. And even after he got indicted, there were people that still stuck up for him. And I was like, how could you possibly stick up for him? Like, you didn't even try to look into the truth. You're just taking his word for it. And even up until the end, that he was, posting stuff that, a Brady violation, this and that. People were still defending him because I obviously wasn't friends with him, but people were sending me screenshots, and I'm like, are these people insane? Like, how? Get the evidence from the court. You could have came to the hearings. You could have seen the evidence. How can you defend this person? Whether you hate me, whether you love me, take the humans out of it. Just looking at the animals, in my opinion, and I've always said this, if you can hurt, and this ties into Steffen too, with what's being opened up, with his prints on that missing girl, whether he did it or not, I don't know, but If you can hurt an innocent animal like Remy, who did absolutely nothing wrong to him, it's not like this dog that attacked and mauled him and he was angry at the time and he did this, that it was a reaction. No, it was just nothing. It's just part of his day and part of his life. So if you can hurt these innocent animals who've done nothing, what are you going to do to a human being who you feel has done you wrong? There's no measure of where it could stop.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me and for all this information. Again, thank you very much for everything that you did. And we'll see what happens, but at least for now, we can say that justice was served.
Thank you, Doctor. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor.
Well, this is it. This is the end of the journey. And as I have mentioned multiple times before, this is just a fraction of all of the things that happen. There is so much that there's just not enough time in a podcast and a video and anything to go over all the different things. But I'm hoping that the guests and myself have been able to give you enough information to educate you on all of the things that he did, not just so that we know why he was held responsible for his actions, but that also hopefully we can, move the legal system forward and hold more people accountable, because animals do matter. And these people that take advantage of animals and abuse them, we know about the link. We know that they can abuse humans as well. So we're not safe with them. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, thank you for listening and thank you for caring.